So my name is Maryann O'Donnell. I'm the superintendent of Clinton Public Schools, and I'm glad to see so many of you here tonight, and to be here to view the film. And this is something that, as part of an ongoing conversation with our community groups, both human services here in town, as well as PTA and our own mental health staff, administrators, teachers, and as a community, talking with parents, that we continue to look for ways to come together as a community to meet the needs of our students, address concerns that we see, and make sure that we have a really healthy, strong school community as well as Clinton community. And so it's a pleasure to be able to do these partnerships and then to bring a film like this that really, I think, hits all of us in different ways and different messages and themes. So I want to begin tonight with the panel. We'll do a quick introduction. On my right, I have Dave Melillo, who is the director of the Human Services Department here in town in Clinton. And next to him is one of his staff members, Maureen, Pinette, and maybe a familiar face for many of you. On my left are two of our mental health providers here in the Clinton Public Schools. I have Maureen Tranquili, who is a social worker, has worked in all of our schools and is currently assigned to the high school. And then next to her is Steve Mendelssohn. He's one of our school psychologists, and he has been at Elliott, and this year he's sharing time at both Elliott and Morgan. So we talked a little bit about how to begin this following the film, and this is the first time that all of these panelists have seen the film as well, so we're kind of watching it together. And we thought we would start by sharing the mic and asking each of them to kind of share some perspective related to either something that resonated with them in the film or something from their perspective that links in the work they do and what some of the messaging in the film is. And we'll begin that way, and then we'll move forward from there.
Okay. Hi, I've been working here in Clinton for about 16 months, but I have done this work all of my life. And I guess what strikes me is from the student who's paralyzed to give a class presentation to the student who feels they can't even walk in the door in the morning, the amount of anxiety has just grown. And that's not here in Clinton, that's everywhere. If you were to talk to school people in any district and throughout the country, you would find the same thing. So the thing that haunts me in all this is why? Why now? We need to take care of these kids. We need to find ways to help them get an education. We need to find ways to help them cope with their anxiety. But there's still a part of me that says, why is anxiety different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago? Some part of it is we're more open about it, and other parts of it we could only wonder. But I do think from everything from teaching our kids how to cope with things not going well better, that we need to do that, and helping kids learn how to deal with strong feelings, that we need to do that. Who knows if there's something we put in additives in our food or something in our environment that's adding to all this, just that it has changed. And while we need to help our kids be better at coping, we also need to keep an eye out on what we could do to lower the stress.
Hi, I'm Maureen Tranquili. I've been at Morgan actually for 19 years this year, and I do some private practice the past couple of years as well. And I'll agree with David that there's absolutely a rise in treating anxiety in both of the areas that I'm working. Something that resonated with me when watching this was, just the part about listening. Obviously, in my role, that's what I do. But I think in order to treat any individual who has anxiety, we have to listen to what their individual needs are. And I think we do a really good job here of listening and kind of sometimes thinking outside the box as to how to address a student's needs. You know, I watched where students were saying they need to take space, and we do a lot of that here. Some students will need a little break to listen to music. Some need to come down and talk. We have ways of giving support passes and things like that to allow that to happen. So just really, I can't say enough of just listening to each individual and making sure that we're getting where they're coming from in order to treat best what they need.
So I've been working in Clinton for 21 years, and I will say in that time, I've definitely seen an increase in the levels of anxiety of kids of all ages. It's just a matter of, I've got a 5-year-old or a teenager, and I've also seen an escalation of anxiety with a lot of parents as well. So as a family therapist, a lot of the work that I do is with families and trying to understand the context of relationships with folks. And I find that, you know, a lot of parents are struggling with very high levels of stress in their own lives. And so, you know, as far as the whole family component of things, I find that to be pretty important in terms of being able to facilitate some positive change. I usually focus a lot on building skills and specific strategies, but also I do a lot of work with self-care, teaching self-care skills. And then it kind of forces me also as an adult, I'm telling these kids to do it, I gotta walk the walk, and then, you know, but I think again, acknowledging, I think, what our own anxieties are and that it's something that we all struggle with can help to normalize it for kids who are going through that as well. So.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Mendelssohn, school psychologist here at Morgan and Elliott, and this is my 10th year. One of the main things that I think about when we talk about anxiety and stress is trying to reframe the conversation a little bit and the idea behind it. Because I do think there unfortunately sometimes is a tendency to over-pathologize stress and anxiety. And the reality is that stress and anxiety are, you know, natural biological responses. They're there for a reason. You know, they let us know when something is changing in our environment. They let us know when there's something to be scared of, something that is scary. So I do think that we at times need to understand that stress can be an ally at times. It can be a motivator. And the idea is that, unfortunately, there are times where we have to allow our adolescents and our children to experience some levels of that to encourage growth. That's hard to hear, and it's definitely probably harder to hear when you have your son or daughter on the floor in the midst of a panic attack and suffering. You know, the natural primal tendency will be to kind of respond and protect and alleviate all that. And sometimes we talk about anxiety as like a fire that we need to put out before it becomes like a conflagration, something bigger. I tend to think that we should, at times, you know, look at it more like a storm, that we can't always necessarily stop it from coming, but understanding that it will pass, and, you know, when it does pass, there'll be clearer eyes to view what's happening. And our job is to kind of be a supportive person in our children's lives during those moments, not to alleviate, not to save, not to rescue, because as some of the film talked about, you know, avoidance is something that can reinforce the anxious feelings and can make it worse, and really kind of at times robs, you know, our students' ability to grow and have that growth opportunity. So that's, you know, one of my main perspectives on the topic to begin with, to kind of reframe it from this idea that it's always pathological and something's always wrong when if someone has some levels of anxiety. Because the reality is that it is part of who we are as human beings, and it does exist for a reason.
So I'm going to jump in a little bit with something that I think has resonated with me, and really it's something I struggle with as a parent of a 16-year-old boy. And that transition from my child and the relationship I had to now his level of independence and taking those steps into academics and all aspects of, you know, a high school community. And as a parent, how my actions, acceptance, encouragement, questions, focus can impact him in terms of his lens of stress, anxiety. I mean, the movie is called Angst, which I think is a really unique descriptor. And I think there is a lot of angst. I think there may be a song about teenage angst. There's probably one or two. And so I really reflect on how the interaction and what was powerful for me in the movie were those couple of scenes with the dad and his daughter, and the communication of, you know, I love you, Dad, and I'm proud of you for listening, and his comment to his daughter about, I'm really proud of her. And then the other moment where the girl shared that she had a hard time talking to her mom about what she was really experiencing, and she used email. And so it really, as I was watching this, was really reflecting on how I interact, and Steve's comments are, you know, helpful to me. I think it's complicated, and I think we all navigate this in our relationships and our families. And as a school community, it's a family to me as well. And so the topic, the insights, the various pieces that were in the film really got me thinking and reflecting, and I think a lot of what was shared here. So with that said, we want to take a few minutes, and if there are some insights you want to share or some comments for panel to reflect upon, or something that you felt was powerful within the film, we'd be happy to entertain that for a little bit. I think there's a variety of ways, and I think each of us, depending on our lens, different things resonate with us. So we'd like to kind of engage some conversation a little bit tonight, and can direct some questions to the panel, or share some insights or some thinking. So if you'd like to, raise your hand. We have a couple of mics coming around, I think. Right in the middle. If you can follow, we have a mic coming if you want. So
in the film, at one point, they talked about the person not being able to describe what they're feeling. So the verbiage is really important. If the kids don't have that, and she said, I know, you know, she tells them, we'll try. What if they can't? Like, is there some way to teach that? Like how you tell them how you're feeling? Because that's huge.
So I think that, yeah, it's really important. So sometimes, you know, kids may not already have a very formulated feelings vocabulary, and so something that's very helpful is to be able to expand being able to talk about different levels of feelings, different sizes of feelings. They were talking in here about numbers, being able to, you know, talk about small levels of being upset versus, you know, large. I also like to talk about the rate in which feelings grow, so that, you know, it helps them to have a better concept. And again, the more that you process these kinds of things, the better they're able to find words for it. So there's this great concept out there called brain plasticity, and that means that we can train our brain a whole lot better than we used to believe that we could, and train it with new habits. So to speak, one of those habits could be being able to articulate sizes of feelings, rate of growth of feelings. And one of the things that happens in your brain when you have huge levels of anxiety is the feelings part of your brain takes over and the thinking part shuts down. So some kids and people, like adults, will you know, but they have the vocabulary, but they can't access it, because that thinking, problem-solving part of your brain shuts down and those connections aren't built. So the more that you do that kind of thing where you're expanding the feelings vocabulary, processing it, rate of you know, growth of feelings, the more you talk about it, name it to tame it. Dan Siegel, a famous psychologist, neuropsychologist, talks about the brain, and he talks about a thing called name it to tame it. That pushes things from your feelings part of your brain to your thinking part of your brain, and they did talk about that a bit in the movie.
just want to add one thing to that. In particular, please, with your sons, give them a vocabulary for feelings, because they're less likely to have one, and often we feel like we're not supposed to. It's unmasculine to be able to discuss feelings. So a lot of the people who can't describe how they're feeling at all, and my experience has been more boys than girls.
Thank you. I really appreciate the point that you just made. I would really like to see our culture shift in terms of it being okay for people to express their emotion. So we're talking about emotion. I'm talking about people actually experiencing their emotions. So, you know, men in our culture cannot be emotional. They're allowed to show anger. Women are not permitted to show anger. And women who are emotional are crazy. And for me, I've done some body work where it's all about experiencing and having emotion without having to label it or analyze it, but it's just kind of the human experience of it. And so I think that that's a piece that's missing from the conversation, is our comfort with being with each other and allowing people to have emotion and express it, and there being nothing wrong with it. I don't think we have the capacity to experience our lives anymore, because it's all about boxing things up and being in control and not having outlets.
I think that goes right hand in hand with what Mr. Mendelssohn was saying, that anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. That if you learn to listen to what it's telling you, because sometimes it's telling you something needs to change, and rather than pathologizing it and putting stigma on it with the way that we talk about it, like you said, and men and women have different, issues and challenges with that. I think that that's an important point right there.
I know there's not been a question, but there is something I want to add. If your child has some troubling anxiety and you're having a hard time, I can't encourage you enough to get some help. I'm a parent of a former child with a lot of anxiety and dealing with that, and you're always caught between this: am I making too many excuses? Am I pushing too hard? And how do you deal with it? And with my own daughter, I was, being in this profession and all that didn't help quite as much as I, would have liked it to. Whether you call people at school and ask for some help, or you call us at Human Services, I think it's something that you're going to feel pulled in a couple of ways, and be looking to get the right balance that respects their anxiety, but also kind of creates room for growth. And that could be a tougher spot to hit, and an objective opinion is helpful.
Hello, we have 2 children in high school, and I'm just wondering what kind of training is being done in the schools for the teachers, because as a parent, mostly we just see our children in the evening. They come home from school all stressed out already. And I'm just wondering what's going on in the schools for the teachers themselves, get them trained to help.
So there's a variety of ways that, we work with teachers throughout the year, and topics that we determine are important for teachers to explore. Clearly, there's a lot on teachers' plates, and a lot of that conversation is instructional, and it's around their curriculum. And the stepping back and the question about how much is too much, and how do we get to really know our students as learners, know what their strengths and weaknesses are, know the children who are going to struggle or have some anxieties about certain things. Those are all pieces that we talk about on a regular basis. And we have structures in place where in each school we have what we call student assistance teams. And so teachers, counselors, administrators have those forums to talk about students that may be showing some signs of stress or anxiety, signs of things outside of school that are impacting them. And those meetings happen on a regular basis, weekly often in many of the buildings. And so that's an opportunity where a group of experts, including the people sitting next to me, and they'll share a little more, can often try to get at some of the root causes and develop some interventions and some things to put in place to support the students. Oftentimes that involves working with the teachers of those students to help know the best way to support, to nurture, and to manage them. That's one kind of concrete way. We also have trainings throughout the year that we've partnered with Human Services, and they have come in and worked with our teachers in a variety of things. Last year, a grant was received, and if you want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, I'll turn the mic over so he can talk about some of the training that we've done with teachers and then is also being embedded in our health curriculum. Our teachers also get some training in curriculum in the elementary school that they're providing related to social emotional aspects of students and behavior development. And so those are some discrete lessons, and they get training on how to deliver those. And then, to be honest, it's ongoing, and sometimes it's in the moment training, depending on what a school or a community may be experiencing. And then we look at some targeted topics that we can bring in some experts that can talk to our teachers. And that's often done through faculty meetings, times, or within professional development. I think the last piece that we talk about a lot and struggle with a lot is how do we help talk to each other to help manage and balance the workload and the experiences that our students have. And I think that's still something, especially as you get to the high school level where there are 6, 7 different teachers coordinating those kinds of things for students. And a lot of our focus has been around building a school community that is focused on our students and tries to create those open opportunities to talk. And it's not perfect, but there's active work that goes on to understand your students as learners and then be able to respond individually to them depending on what might be happening.
Just to add to that, the conversations and referrals and things that happen within the school allow us as support staff to go into classrooms, to assist teachers, to observe students and come up with the best plan possible. I think that is often very valuable because it's an opportunity where we're kind of assisting in the classroom through observations and helping the teacher to better address a need as it arises. But like Maryann said, a lot of times we're given the opportunity also to share what we see, what we've learned even at different kinds of workshops and things that we continue to educate ourselves and share with the staff via different department meetings and things like that. So it's a process that's constantly going, and I think we listen to one another and see what the needs are and continue to address them.
Yes, we received a 2-year grant from the Connecticut United Way to do basically a suicide prevention program. I know recent events make it hard to discuss this issue, and but to do this, every teacher, not only in this building, but every teacher in the district received QPR training, which is question, persuade, and refer. Thank you. So every teacher has received that training. And I'd say about 100 other community members have received that training to date. Also, as part of that grant, we have every 3rd grader has a prevention program called Gizmo, which is adorable and sweet, but is a depression, suicide prevention program, getting help. There's a 7th grade program called SOS, and there's also SOS in the 11th grade. So we're not done yet. We're now looking at introducing For What's Next, which is another program to help kids cope. But this is all stuff that's coming out of that grant that hopefully will be maintained beyond the life of the grant.
I think I want to add one other thing that also is part of the partnership of these 3 groups is we partnered a year ago with Sandy Hook Promise, who really has a focus on prevention and mental health supports for kids and building stronger and safer school communities through some specific programs. And one of them, well, 2 of them, we've had trainings now at our middle school and high school that teachers have also participated in knowing the signs and start with hello, which really is the same messaging of talking to one another, that idea of kindness, listening, noticing, and referring and seeking out that help and support when you see a friend or a student who may be struggling and reaching out to that trusted adult. So that's another partnership that we've done in the last 2 years, and that's a continual piece. The state of Connecticut actually put together a grant to allow Sandy Hook Promise to come in and be able to sustain some of their programming. And it's one piece of the puzzle of the big picture for us of how we're building a stronger, healthier school climate. But as we saw even tonight in the film, there are many multiple facets to all of these experiences, and really being able to be open, to be honest, as someone shared earlier about what we're feeling, and developing that language and ability of having someone they can talk to and go to is, I think, the ultimate purpose of all of these pieces.
Hi. I know that you talked about anxiety being higher at this point. And what's your thoughts about technology and anxiety, and how kids communicate, and how through the technology and networking, how kids are bullied as well, and the anxiety level is extremely high at that point. So how do you address that, and what do you think about that?
You make a very valid point. I think one of the things that we try to teach our students, help them understand, is that, you know, when you're communicating through social media or technology, there's this level of dehumanization that occurs where you don't have to face the immediate human impact of what you say to somebody. There's a latency between what you send and then when you actually get the feedback of how that made someone feel. And I think there just has to be a lot of communication and teaching around that point. And unfortunately, sometimes it's hard lessons that are learned. But the idea that students are able to, or really anybody, this is adults too, can really communicate in ways where they're not necessarily held responsible or accountable in the moment, really kind of reinforces the ability to say things that aren't tempered or aren't reconstructed in a more, pro-social way. And you're right, there just needs to be a continued amount of teaching around that for our students.
When I grew up back in the 1800s, you could get bullied all day in school and then you went home and the bullying stopped. Nowadays, the bullying never ends. It can go through the night, it can keep you awake, you can be ridiculed and dealt with a lot of ways. I think that is, besides the lack of, you could be meaner if it's not direct contact, like Stephen was saying. But I think the biggest thing is the nonstop nature of it. And it's so dangerous. And, sometimes you'd like to think parents would help gain some control when some problems have been reported to them about their children. But even the kid who's getting picked on, at some point, is it worth having that device? for what you have to put up with to keep. But it's hard. It's a new problem that didn't exist.
And David, I just want to add from that perspective on screen time. A couple of years ago, we hosted Screenagers, and I highly recommend Tech Talk Tuesdays. You can just go to their website. Has some really good information that addresses the screen time, bullying, all of those topics. Any more questions? Any more?
I did want to throw out there a couple of years ago, one of the partnerships that we all did together was called The Mask You Live In, and that was, somebody brought up boys' social emotional development. I do believe that it is currently still on Netflix, but the version that they show is the adult version, which is very candid and frank and graphic, but brings a lot of points home. So just to let everybody know that that is available, and it is something that we also, all the teachers at Joel, was it 2 years ago? Was Mr. Macrino put that together? It was either 2 or 3. Yeah, and we had all of the Joel teachers. It was one of their staff days that we had done a processing with that. So I thought that was good. The dialogue was really good. The Mask You Live In. That's excellent.
Any other? Okay, well, thank you very, very much to all of you for your time and your insights. We truly appreciate that. And Matt, we appreciate you being behind the scenes running the film. And with that, I hope you'll, we have some handouts at the tables out front. Please pick some up on your way out and sign in so we can keep the conversation going. And please join our conversation on social media as well. Thank you.